In this next video, we're going to talk about muscle movements, types, and naming. And eventually we'll talk about the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle and end with development and disease. So our learning objectives are to define some keywords like origin, insertion, prime mover, antagonist, synergist, and fixator. We want to demonstrate the different types of body movement, and we want to understand how muscles work together to produce movements. So we have 5 golden rules of muscle activity. Now they're named golden because they're important, so you should remember them. The first, with few exceptions, all skeletal muscles are going to cross over at least one joint. Typically, the bulk of a skeletal muscle lies proximal, closer to the site of attachment, to the joint that it crosses. All skeletal muscle have at least 2 attachments, the origin and the insertion. Skeletal muscles can only pull, they never push. During contraction, a skeletal muscle insertion is going to move towards the origin. So the origin is the immovable or less movable spot of the muscle attachment, and the insertion is going to move towards the origin when the muscle moves. So if we look at our bicep, we have an origin and an insertion, and when we flex, that insertion will move closer to the origin. Let's now think about body movement. So for this, the best thing you can do is stand up and do it out loud. Okay. Flexion, we're going to decrease the angle. So we're going to flex at our elbows, extend at our elbows. We're increasing the angle. Flex, extend, flex, extend. You can also hyperextend, which means you'll go beyond 180 degrees. Now, I can't do that at my elbows because I'm not double jointed, but you could do that at your shoulders. So you flex, you bring your arms down, you extend, and then you hyperextend. We can do that with our head. You flex, extend, you bring it back, hyperextend, you go all the way back. You can also rotate when you have a longitudinal axis, side to side. If you're moving away from your body, that's lateral. If you bring it back towards in, that's a medial rotation. We have certain movements about the midline. So the flexion extension, we're in that sagittal plane, moving in this direction. We can also move things side to side, towards the midline or away from the midline. That we call abduction and adduction. So abduction, move your arm away from the midline. Adduction, bring it closer. Ab away, add closer. And circumduction is when you make a cone shape with your limbs. I'm doing it here at my arm. Cone, cone, circumduction. Okay, make sure you're doing these movements along, okay? Let's move our feet now. We're going to flex our toes with dorsiflexion and point them with plantar flexion. P for point, P for plantar. We're going to invert our toes, bring them together like a pizza slice, and evert our toes, which is like first position if you ever took ballet. Invert, evert. Movement of the forearm. So we have those 2 bones in our forearm. When we're in anatomical position, this is supination, and when we rotate them and put our palms in the other direction, we call that pronation. I remember this because if your arms are in supination, you can hold a cup of soup in your hands, and then pronate, pour the soup out. Supinate, hold the soup, pronate, pour the soup out. Opposition. We call these opposable thumbs. It's part of what makes us and monkeys so cool. So when you touch your thumbs to your fingers, this is opposition. Opposable thumbs, opposition, opposition. Okay, make sure you do all those movements. Now, let's think about muscles in general. Muscles can only pull, so they need to work together. The major muscle involved with the movement is called the prime mover, and it's usually opposed by an antagonist muscle. A synergist is one that will help the prime mover, but isn't the major muscle involved with the movement. And if it holds the origin still, we call that a fixator, so it's a type of synergist. Major muscles, you can think about where they are in relation to what they do. So muscles that are flexing are going to cross to the front of a joint. They're going to cross anteriorly, not for our knees and ankles when we're thinking about our upper body. And then if they cross posteriorly behind the joint, then they're going to produce extension. If they cross to the lateral side, they're going to be involved with abduction. And if they're on the medial side, they're going to be involved with adduction. And again, for this, you want to think it's pulling. So where does it have to pull? If it wants to bring your arm closer to your body, it's got to pull on the underside. When we name our muscles, we can name them in a variety of different ways. Some are named for the direction of the fibers, their size, their location, the number of origins, the location of that origin or insertion, the shape of the muscle, or the action of the muscle. And all muscles are arranged in fascicles. And again, different shapes of fascicles can give us different functions. So if it's circular, it's going to be around openings, and those are going to squeeze or relax to open that opening. Or we can have a convergent on a single origin. So we can create a fan, like our pectoralis major will create a fan. This creates a large amount of force on that single insertion. If it is parallel, it's going to run along the length of a long axis. This is a fusiform. This is a more flexible muscle shape. And then pennate is when you have short fascicles coming obliquely to a central tendon. And this allows you to pack in even more fibers into a short area. And again, what we know is that we increase the strength of our contraction by the number of fibers. So the more fibers we can pack into a space, the more power we're going to get from our contractions. So the most power is a multipennate. Bipennate, not as much power. Unipennate, even less power. Okay, so in this video, we talked about movements, types, and names. In the next video, we'll talk about the gross anatomy of skeletal muscle.